Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Gianfrancesco. I'm one of the founding members of LitX, the educational collective that talks about using popular culture in the classroom. I'm really proud to present to you this panel, of which I was a participant, called Real News, Using Comics to Combat Misinformation in the Digital Age. This panel is all about helping not just teach students, but also teaching the general public how to find and ferret out, if you will, facts from spin. We had a great group of educators, creators, and journalists as part of this, including Heidi MacDonald, the editor-in-chief at Comics Beat, Ethan Sachs, an NBC journalist and author of the COVID Chronicles graphic novel, Tony Weaver, the founder of Weird Enough Productions and author of the Uncommons comic series, Farid Haque, the founder of Erly Stage Studios and the story author of the Real Fake graphic novel, which is available online. And of course, myself, secondary ELA teacher and one of the scriptwriters for that same Real Fake graphic novel I just mentioned. Our moderator is educator Illya Kowalchuk, who was the former director for education for Pop Culture Classroom and is currently a classroom teacher in Boulder, Colorado. So this panel was amazing to participate in. I really felt like I was standing on the shoulders of giants here. So without further ado, I present to you Real News, Using Comics to Combat Misinformation in the Digital Age.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another wonderful LitX panel here on YouTube. Today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about real news, how we can use comics to combat misinformation in the digital age. This is, again, another panel presented by LitX, the cohort that discusses how literacy and pop culture work together to facilitate greater thought and education and beyond. My name is Illya Kowalchuk, and I will be your panel moderator for today. We've got some wonderful panelists on with us today. First off, we have Heidi MacDonald, Ethan Sachs, Farid Haque, Tony Weaver, Michael Gianfrancesco, and myself. Here's some social media tags, which will also be on their slides right here. So I'll give them the chance to go ahead and introduce themselves right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heidi MacDonald. I am the editor-in-chief of The Beat at comicsbeat.com. It's a site that I've been running for about 15 years. First, it was just me. I looked and I've written about 30,000 posts on this site over the years. I actually have a wonderful staff now that does a better job than me covering comics. But it's been covering sort of news stories in comics. Some people say I'm a journalist. I just think I'm snoopy and I like to ask questions, but I've been doing it for a while, so I kind of have my own little internal guidance, I guess I'd say, for what the truth is. But yeah, great to be here. There's a fantastic topic. I'm really thrilled to talk about it.
Thanks, Heidi. Ethan?
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. My name is Ethan Sachs. I was a 20-year veteran newspaper reporter at the New York Daily News, and I left to become a comic book writer. But I stayed sort of with one foot in that world, writing once a week or twice a week for NBC News. And then AWA Studios and Axel Alonso more specifically brought me in right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, because I'd been doing some COVID reporting for NBC News. And we launched this project called COVID Chronicles, which we spoke to 10 people who were either first responders or at the sort of the center of the pandemic from around the world, and sort of told their stories in graphic format with artist Dalibor Talajic. It ran first on NBC News as a 10-part series, and then it was collected in a trade. So this topic is very near to my heart.
Thank you, Ethan. We're glad you're here. Farid.
Hey, thanks so much, Illya and Michael, for asking me to come on board and do this without all of you. Super company. So, hey, everybody. So my name is Farid. I've grown up as a strategist and advisor in the tech space. So really the last person to expect to sort of dive into comic books, but always been a fan, loved it, grew up reading graphic novels, huge fan of bande dessinée as a format from the Belgian French extraction. I just always wanted to do this, and I was in a bookstore one day and I bumped into this guy who turned out to be one of my heroes, Max Brooks, and we collaborated and created a couple of things. One of which was an early piece on germ warfare, very prescient because this is pre-COVID, and then more recently we've been collaborating with the U.S. government on I think are fairly important pieces of, I'll call it literature, because I think that's what it'll be. Hopefully it's fiction, but it's inspired by real things, and it's a resilience series trying to combat fake news. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here also. All right, Tony, good morning.
Hi, my name's Tony Weaver Jr., and I am the founder of an organization called Weird Enough Productions. At Weird Enough, what we do is we use diverse comics and stories to empower young people and the adults that support them. So we have an original series that we create called The Uncommons that tells a story of 5 unlikely outsiders that have to save each other to save the world. Since we put it out into the world last year, The Uncommons has garnered about 2 million readers online. I think we're at 2.2 million now, which is really fun. But what we also do is that we take The Uncommons and we partner it with lesson plans and curricula around media literacy, digital literacy, and social emotional learning. And we put that curricula in front of about 400,000 students in schools and after school programs, as well as direct to households across 14 states. So really, as an organization, what we're focused on is leveraging the power of storytelling to make young people feel recognized and empowering the adults that care about those young people to give them the tools that they need to be happy and successful in the real world.
Thank you, Tony. Welcome. We're glad you're here. And Michael.
Thank you for choosing that picture.
You told me I could pick a picture from Facebook, so I took that one.
You did. That's me getting my master's degree. Yes, my name is Michael Gianfrancesco. I'm a high school English teacher in the Providence, Rhode Island area. I'm also sometimes an adjunct faculty member at Johnson & Wales University in Providence. I'm one of the founders of LitX, along with a number of teachers from around the country, where we believe that the X in LitX means that literature is a variable. It can be anything. It can be a comic, a song, a video game, a movie, anything. I also, what makes this topic particularly interesting to me is that I teach a graphic novel class and a media studies class at my high school, and I use comics in the media studies class from time to time. I was also with Farid, worked with him. I was one of the script writers for Real Fake, the CISA graphic novel, which you can download for free on the CISA website. And I want to thank everybody for being here to have this conversation with us.
Thanks, Michael. And just briefly, my name is Illya Kowalchuk. I am also a high school, I teach math, and I was the one of the founders of Pop Culture Classroom and Denver Comic Con, as well as the director of education there. So I ran, innovated, designed, and implemented all of the educational programs that we did during my tenure there. So really, really proud and excited to be a part of this panel today. So thanks, everybody. So I'm just going to jump right in with the first question. How do you see comics, webcomics, self-published, zines, combating misinformation? And I'm just going to throw it out there and ask that you go ahead, jump in with what makes sense to you, being mindful of time for our participants. Who'd like to start?
It's okay. I'd love to kick off and then maybe hand over to whoever wants to go next. So I'm just going to take, I'll try and keep it to a minute and then we'll pass the mic. So look, I think fake news, misinformation, disinformation, there's a lot of terms here being thrown about, but what's important at the end of the day is making sure that people hear the truth. And I think what's become prevalent now, at least online, is that truth has become really hairy. It's become really hard to figure out what is the truth, because there's so many sources of it, and you never know. You know, one person starts the news and it's a game of whispers. By the time it gets to the fourth person, it's very different, or it's actually been engineered differently right from the get-go. But how do you know what's what? And I think that's one of the challenges. There's a lot of bad state actors out there. There's people with different intentions, objectives. So I think we just need to shine a spotlight. I think that's the biggest thing that comic books can do today, is shine a spotlight on the kinds of things that are happening. A lot of the stories that we've tried to tell, that Michael and I have co-written together, along with Clint Watts, our co-author, who's a really serious expert on misinformation, are really all about taking that huge lamp and shining it on those stories. And I think hopefully what we're trying to do is educate another generation on the kinds of things that are happening. And believe it or not all of them are happening on the ground in the US. Some of them are happening in troll farms in Africa and in other countries around the world, but they're all being engineered by somebody. So you got to watch out for this stuff. I'm going to hand over to maybe Heidi or anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that comics are, comics, cartoons have always been used as propaganda, and I'm using that as a neutral term, but obviously political cartoons are one of the earliest parts of the comics history, with Thomas Nast and so many others. And, they're a very powerful means of communication. And I think they're a very powerful means of communication for truth. And I do think that comics texts have an innate sort of, veracity to them that makes them very persuasive to people. And, I think that makes them a very powerful tool for educating people, because we do know that the use of words and pictures together, stimulates, just on a neurocellular level, stimulates the brain so that it engages the thinking. So it's a great means to communicate. And I would look at, texts like Mouse and March, which have really become very, very primary in the fields of the Holocaust and civil rights history. So and they've just reached people, regular people, so to speak. They're certainly not academic, but yeah, I think comics can be a very powerful tool. And as Farid said, though, there's a lot of smart people out there who know how gullible people are to misinformation and how vulnerable they are to it, and they're very good at using fake information to fool people. And it's a full-time job, really, trying to fight that.
I think that in the place where we are in the media landscape right now, comics are one of the most powerful tools we can have for combating misinformation. My reasoning behind that is because I think that misinformation today is more visual than anything else. So I can go to a website of a news organization that will otherwise be considered a reliable source. And if I continue scrolling, when I get to the bottom of that story, I'll see a picture that's like, you'll never believe what 10 celebrities had plastic surgery done. These 4 things will rot your teeth out, or something like that. And in theory, I'm on a website that is a reliable source. And for whatever reason, because of where news organizations are right now and trying to figure out how to monetize, they're okay with letting these people peddle misinformation on their site, on their page. However, through visual literacy, I can point out what's a sponsored post and what isn't. I can look for the fine print and say, okay, here's what's being paid for specifically to be put here by advertisers. Here's something that's just getting plugged in as a part of an ad network. And here's an actual story that the journalists on this website created and promoted. And I think those sorts of visual literacy skills of being able to read between the lines and look at the visual cues in order to understand what information is being prioritized in the information architecture, what is background information, what the focal point is meant to be, and things like that. I think that sort of stuff can be really helpful.
Just to jump, I'm sorry, please. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. Okay, I'll just jump in really quickly. I'm both optimistic and pessimistic. I'm optimistic in the sense that I do think graphic depiction or graphic journalism evokes, people can agree on what they're seeing in that case. It's evoking, whether it's an emotion or a truth. It gets the point across a myriad of audiences. My pessimism comes from the fact that it's the distribution of it, right? So there was a Pew Center study from November of last year that found that 85% of Americans, either Biden supporters or Trump supporters, basically found that they not only disagreed on politics and policies, but on basic facts. And you see that with the aftermath of the election. You see that with the handling of COVID, things like that. So people are now getting their news, or what they interpret as their news, from whatever sources they choose. And so I think the biggest stumbling block is, how do you get your message to people that aren't receptive to your message? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that that is an easy fix. But I think that is the biggest stumbling block.
Yeah, I mean, in my career, I deal with high school students, and what I try to do, particularly in my media studies class, although this sometimes does bleed into some of the other English classes that I teach, is trying through a nonpartisan way to teach them how to find information and vet it properly, and how to know the difference between what is real and what is fake. I mean, the term fake news, it's not a new one. It's been around for a long, long time, but it's become like this hot button term it's an easy catch-all for anybody that sees something, information that disagrees with their worldview. So with more and more nonfiction, graphic novels, and one in particular that I use in my media studies class, which is The Influencing Machine, the graphic novel version by Brooke Gladstone. It was illustrated by Josh Neufeld, who himself is also has done some great nonfiction graphic novels, including AD New Orleans After the Deluge, which is telling the story of people who survived Katrina. But The Influencing Machine is really dedicated to, in a very even and level-handed way, teaching kids how to recognize spin versus fact. And it also encourages that debate, which is one of the first things in that class that we talk about, is does the media generate the news that they want people to believe, or do what people want drives the news? In other words, does the news give people what they want to hear, or do people tell news agencies what they want and the agency caters to that? We talk about those echo chambers that have become kind of like more and more polarized. And I think graphic novels, particularly that one, as well as a number of other, like I said, nonfiction books, are a really great inroad early on that is less intimidating to certainly high school students. And I think just people in general who are more visually oriented, to present that information and those differences and some of those structures on how to find your way to the truth in a way that's accessible for the more and more visual type learners and visual type people who are more visual in terms of their absorption of information. So that's kind of what's been working for me.
It's interesting hearing common threads with all of what you're saying, right? Tony mentioned the difficulty in understanding misinformation as visual, and Michael, the commonalities there in terms of teaching kids to develop that media literacy is really important. Because Tony, when you were speaking, I was just thinking about how many people are surfing and don't differentiate between the CNN article or whatever news site it might be and those, like rotting your gut kind of foods that are out there, because there's a huge difference.
Power wash.
Yeah. So I'm gonna push the conversation, because some of you started to talk about techniques, and while I certainly think we can all agree that there's optimism and pessimism out there, and with the way forward through journalistic integrity. So one thing came up recently this week that kind of got me thinking. The Pulitzer Foundation recently honored Darnella Frazier for, and as they wrote, courageously recording the murder of George Floyd, the video that spurred protests against police brutality around the world, highlighting, and this is the part that really got me, the crucial role of citizens in journalists' quest for truth and justice, end quote. So when I was reading that and listening to it, I was thinking about this panel and curious as to what do comic artists, in your opinion, do comic artists represent a form of citizens journalism? And if so, what responsibility do these artists have to contemporary society?
Yeah, I think, oh, I'm sorry, Heidi, please.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that this is an interesting question, because I think there are already comics artists out there that have for a long time been doing that kind of work. I think you can go all the way back to Mouse on that, where a person's story a nonfiction story was communicated through graphic novel. I think Joe Sacco does, or Sacco, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He did a book called Journalism, but he's done Safe Area Garazdi. He's done stuff all over the world where he, and I think the question I would ask, I wonder if anyone here has an answer to it, would those be considered primary documents if he is recording what he sees and experiences? But yeah, I think for sure, a lot of these artists that are putting themselves out there in war zones or on the streets and that are coming back with these real stories and documenting them, I definitely think that they are becoming voluntary or not citizen journalists. So
I was just going to mention, you mentioned Josh Neufeld, who did, AD about Katrina, and which was quite a while ago. And, we didn't have social media to the extent that we do now at that point. And, for Josh, he kind of gathered up people's accounts. He went and he did first person, interviews, and, he definitely did the research and did the work and made a document that was very authentic about that. We just have, I do think they can be considered citizen journalists. I mean, it's a little bit harder to make comics, as those who are on here who make comics, certainly who are artists, I mean, the courtroom sketch of veracity is one thing, but, making a polished comic takes a lot longer than that. So I don't think it's quite as primary in a lot of ways. I think it requires a lot more dedicated work to make a comic, but people are definitely out there and sketching and making things that are very much of the moment and of their impressions. And these can be very powerful and very persuasive because again, it's the authenticity of the medium. We think a photo is real or a video is real. With the deep fakes that we're having, we know they're not always real. And, yet somehow a comic often has, like I say, this kind of authenticity that's very persuasive.
I think on the citizen journalism, on the subject, first of all, everyone's a citizen journalist now, thanks to social media, right? Like there isn't a single person who's not posting that post becomes official record, right? In fact, in some countries, those posts can be used against you in the court of law. Like you say something against a government, you post something, and you could end up in jail because you posted something that's negative. So I think everyone has to be super careful on the web, depending on where they are, because we take our liberties for granted sometimes in the West. I'm sitting in London, or maybe some of you are sitting in the US. But you try doing that in the Middle East in some country and you might find yourself in a very different location at night. So I think everybody has to be super careful. That's one thing I would say about citizen journalism. Now, that also extends into comic reportage. So I would say that I agree with Heidi completely. It's a lot harder to get a comic book polished and pulled together, right? First of all, it's just a function of time. There's a reason why so many of these are black and white, because it's just easier, to ink. You're not going to, if you color it, it's twice as expensive and twice as long to do. So may as well just get it out as a black and white. Look at one of my favorite pieces of, and I break it up into what I call political journalism, philosophical journalism, and business journalism. And I'm going to give you an example for each. So on the political journalism, you already mentioned Sacco. I actually love Marjan Satrapi and Persepolis, right? Which has also now become a great cartoon. And it's a beautiful story of Iran and what's happened to that country. And I think told, of course, through the eyes of Marjan's character, which I think is, partly biographical. I met her here in London and she said so. And I think that then you have philosophical journalism, right? And philosophical journalism is like Hariri with Sapiens. Like he's not reporting on an event. And in a way he is. He's reporting about something much more meta, right? He's talking about the universe. He's talking about the world. He's talking about mega movements and tidal things that have happened to our culture and society. And that's important reportage too. And I think comics is doing a wonderful job of embedding that into the psyche of younger people. There's many people I know that who would not dare to read the Sapiens book, but they'll pick up the graphic novel instead, right? Hariri, you can drop some money in my Bitcoin account, thanks if there's sales off the back of this. And then finally, you got business journalism, and the favorite one is Chris Anderson, who used to be the editor of Wired. I don't know how many of you have read The Long Tail, but I think it's a wonderfully illustrated story about how niches are the future rather than mainstream, opportunities for business That's a business book. But he's suddenly made it so accessible to an entirely new audience. I think all of those are examples of citizen journalism just told through cartoons and comics.
I guess I'll jump in. I think like when you're talking about using the example of the George Floyd video, which changed the world in so many ways, I think one of the things that is a lot harder to deliver with the same urgency is because of not only the time factor in sort of producing graphic journalism of that kind, it's also it might feel like there's a little bit of a cushion when you're looking at let's say an illustration versus a video. Like a video is that there really is the most powerful impact for a breaking news story, for something that has that kind of immediacy. I think where comics are unparalleled, or where graphic journalism is unparalleled, is showing the emotional resonance baked into something larger. Like you're really getting a snapshot of the feeling in a way that I don't know that you can in any other medium. And you think about some of the great, you think about AD after the deluge, you really get a sense of their lives in a way that you couldn't if it was like a video segment in a news magazine. And so I think that's where the most power comes in from these stories.
Thanks, y'all. My next question I'm going to point towards Tony and Farid, and it deals with the content of the panel and kind of juxtaposed against the fictional accounts of writing that y'all have done in your pieces. And I'm curious how you see the work that you have done with fictional characters, and Tony, in your case, superheroes, as kind of helping the reader learn, differentiate truth from fiction in media, as well as in media and also in real life. So where are the parallels that y'all are, your intentions behind those creations?
So I think that for me, what's very interesting is that in answering this question, you referenced the Uncommons as a superhero comic. And what's fun, kind of in reference to this question, is that I don't consider the Uncommons a superhero comic, but there is commentary about what it means to be a hero and heroism in the comic. So for example, if you look at Influencer, who's a fictional character, like Influencer, in many ways, you can see that a lot of his designs were inspired by Superman, right? I don't necessarily think that makes the Uncommons a superhero comic, but there is commentary that I am making about the concept of a superhero, about who gets to be that. Like he's the only person in the crew that like technically fits into that mold. But when writing him, my idea was, how can I shine a light on how unhealthy lionizing one person is? Like there are so many narratives that are rooted in the idea of the hero's journey in a possessive sense. And I personally think that's really harmful, because a world that's a good one is a world where we don't need heroes. Like if one person has to show up and save everything and rearrange everything and save all the vulnerable people, I honestly feel like we've made a mistake. I don't feel like we should be uplifting that idea. What I prefer more is the hero's plural journey, where everybody is walking along their own path, and in walking that path, we are all moving the world forward towards a sustainable solution. And those are the ideas that I try to champion in my work. So every time I put pen to paper, for me, I consider writing as a conversation. And in most conversations, I don't talk unless I have something to say. So if I'm putting something on paper and I'm putting it into the world, what's really important for me is that there is some commentary being made, that there is some through line that you can grab and trace back to something that's taking place in the world. And it doesn't always have to be something like super pretentious or like that parades itself as being highly intellectual. But I do think that there should be a purpose behind the work that we're developing. Like, because in the previous question, we were talking about citizens and journalists. And I think the only difference, tangibly speaking, between a normal citizen and a journalist is that journalists have a responsibility that they've accepted. And I would say that as writers, we have a responsibility too. to depict people and to depict the world with an understanding of the consequences that our writing can have if we misrepresent people or we represent something in a negative way. Now, whether all of us accept that responsibility remains to be seen, but I do, for one.
Accept and or take advantage of that responsibility.
Yeah.
Can happen in all different sorts of unfortunate ways.
So Tony, huge fan of the uncommon. So well done to you on that. And I cannot agree more with you that I think what we definitely don't need is a hero or a heroine. I think what we need is everyday heroes. And I think that that's very much how we sort of came at it as well. I think a lot of what Michael and I wrote down for our stories was about a group of people from diverse and different backgrounds that came together to try and solve very real problems. And there was no, I guess, superhuman, element to this, but it was really about real world problem solving. And I would say that a lot of our work has to be grounded in reality, right? So because, and I think perhaps part of it is the context. I mean, we are partnering with and writing a story that is to be published by the Cyber Infrastructure and Security Agency. Now that adds a little bit of seriousness, and it also adds massive constraints to the stories that we tell, because you know what, guess what? I can't do certain things in my stories. I can't show blood. I can't, there might not be any scenes of a sexual nature. There might not be certain kinds of clothing. There's lots of restrictions around that. But one of the most interesting constraints that I found myself playing with during this bit of storytelling was actually around diversity and making sure that our characters were representative of the United States, and that they were in tune with where the world was right now, with things like making sure that they were people from different ethnic backgrounds, different abilities. And it sounds like, sure they would be, but actually they wouldn't be. There are no guidelines for diversity in comic books. Think about that for a second. There's a need, and I think a responsibility for people like us, perhaps, to band together and come up with some guidelines saying that maybe it's a good idea to think about some representation at some level around who and what is shown in comic books. So when we were writing this stuff, I was struggling literally to say, well, how am I going to tell the story and make sure, of course, yes, it's grounded in things that really happen, but make sure that it reflects reality. And I think that that's a very important part of storytelling, is to hold a mirror up to society and say, can you relate to this? Because it could happen to you. And part of that is making sure that the representative sample that you play with in terms of the people, the way they look, what they can do, how they speak, is all real. So I thought that that's one thing that we were doing, Illya, which was very unique and really trying to put our finger on what does that standard look like. So I think I'll click on that diversity word and say that was a real experience for me.
So Farid, am I also hearing you say something to the effect that by telling, and Tony, sorry, am I also hearing you say something that by telling these stories through a fictional narrative and holding that mirror up against society, what we're doing is we're maybe making some challenging issues a little bit more approachable for some of our readers? Am I reading into that too much, or is that also part of what your intentions are?
I would certainly agree. I think that there are some subject matter that are just really difficult to talk about. And sometimes the graphic novel format allows someone to communicate ideas and information and also different perspectives in a way that's much more visual and engaging for a person. So I certainly think that there's some benefit there.
Yeah, again, Tony, I need to disagree with you on something, but I totally agree with that as well. And I think that it's important for us all to remember that, part of this storytelling, part of this creation of this narrative, it's all being done to, relay a story and impact. And I think that that impact, with no pun intended, can be quite graphic. If you're imagine watching a movie, you see a murder scene in the movie, and it leaves an impact, and movies are rated, as are comic books, but I think the graphic impact of watching something on TV is far greater than let's say, for example, a comic book in an adverse sense. So a young reader, for example, I think could probably palette a graphic novel in an easier way than they would something that is, told through cinematography, through a movie medium, or through, through video. So I'm a big fan of also being able to linger on the scene a little bit longer. So being able to absorb that, because if you think about video is very fast moving, right? So it happens, it's gone. And very typically you're not going to rewind and watch it again and rewind and watch it again and do it one more time. What you're going to do, however, on a graphic novel is you're going to sit in that page. You're going to look at that and you're going to be like, holy cow. Okay. So deep fakes is a great example. One of our stories, we in real fakes, that's why it's called real fakes as an oxymoron, that it's about, all of these different tools that are being used. And when you see us using Nixon's deep fake with the alternative moon landing in the graphic novel, really makes you think. You're like, would you buy that? If you heard that on the internet today, that, okay, these guys didn't make it, and you'd be sitting there going, oh my God. And how would you share that through WhatsApp and through all your other media? So I think that absorption, that residence time on media page is markedly different than video. So I think that you have a very different sense of what's going on up here.
Farid, it's interesting that you say that. I can, while you were speaking, I was kind of going back through some of my favorite comic panels of all time, and a vast majority of them are silent. And I think for some reason, the silent panels are the ones that I really linger on, and intentionally silent, right? I think about, why is the writer and the artist making these panels intentionally silent? Because they want me to linger. They want me to think about those moments that are happening there in the silence, and how that's either furthering or delaying the story, and whatever the point might be there. It can be interesting. And Tony, thank you also for speaking about your intentions and responsibility there with the panels and the work that you're doing. Question for the whole group about visioning the future of this. So it's a kind of an open-ended question, and I want you all to hear it through your own lenses of your profession and your work. What would you like to see happen in the intersectionality of comics and journalism as we move forward? So I'm going to point this question first towards Ethan. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay, well, I want to start by saying, like, I think, the traditional comic book market that we think of, comic book stores and things like that, it's been so dominated by, the big two publishers or a handful of other publishers that tend to go towards more escapist fare. So I think one of the things, number one, is finding alternative spaces where these nonfiction documentary journalism can thrive. And a lot of times it's in the book market, but it can also be in the digital market, right? Or digital, because then you can sort of get it out to a wider audience. And I think also, just to speak from my own personal experience with NBC News, it took a big leap of faith for them to not only promote it, like to basically publish this on their website, and they have something like 120 to 140 unique visitors a month. So it's a tremendous potential audience for a comic book store, comic book series. But they treated it as if it were, which it was, actual journalism. So they treated it this with the same weight as if it was a video documentary series or a prose documentary series. And so I think giving it that respect from a major outlet was a big deal. And that took a leap of faith from Catherine Kim and David Firestone, who are the people in charge of NBC News. So I think I would love to see more sort of big outlets, The Guardian, BBC, NPR. I would love to see these outlets use this as a tool, which it is, because one of the things that we could do that often other types of COVID coverage couldn't do is, we worked with the subject, the emergency room nurse. She sent us the reference photo. She talked us through. There were multiple interviews. She looked over everything. She corrected things where we misunderstood. And so by the end of it, we really got inside her head, as an example. And that is something, it's a lot harder to do on camera or, with words. So I do think the potential of this, is strong in the hands of major news outlets that can disseminate it widely to a large audience.
Thanks.
I think
Just Heidi, real quick, Ethan, two things I wanted to check in about. Just a clarification, the numbers you said didn't sound quite accurate, so I just want to make sure. You said 120 to 140 unique visitors per month.
Million unique visitors.
Okay, so that seems more accurate.
Yes, 120
and then,
to 140 million. Sorry.
Million. And then just reinforcing what you shared about the accuracy and the lingering and the thoughts, the narration blocks in some of those comics were super powerful in just looking at the nurse in the emergency room, kind of thinking about what she's going through and how she's wrestling with her life in that moment, and there was really no way out. Kind of couldn't avoid that through the narrative block. So thank you for taking your time with that. Thanks, Heidi.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, a lot of times when you're watching a murder show, all these documentaries, a lot of times they do use animation or drawings to show the emotions, which is kind of exactly what you were just talking about. We do perceive the emotion in a drawing very differently than we do in a photograph, and it's much more we're much more able to control that. As far as what I would like to see in comics journalism, it comes and it goes, and I would say maybe 5-6 years ago there was kind of it was a lot more trendy than it is now, and people are getting paid to do it a lot more. There really needs to be equitable pay for people who are doing this work. If we're absolutely right, Farid's correct that everyone with a camera and a stylus and an iPad and an Apple Pen, which is actually limiting people. But anyway, everybody is capturing the world as they see it. But the Nib is a wonderful, wonderful site that specializes in nonfiction comics. It has a lot of really wonderful information on there by a lot of really great cartoonists. And, Matt Bors, who founded the Nib, he's sort of been the pet project of one VC startup after another. And, he took it off by himself, and then now he's off doing something different, even though the Nib is continuing on. So, finding a way to monetize this to finance it is really what we need to see, because it's just very difficult right now. And you're absolutely right, Ethan, that seeing newspapers promote more of this, like the Guardian, or the New York Times has actually done some really great interactive kind of comics features. But hey, newspapers aren't all that great themselves either. We're just the democratization of information has come with a lot of unintended or unexpected consequences, and the fact that it's so hard to monetize it right now is unfortunately one of them. So and I don't have the answer to that. I don't know how we could suddenly get people with a lot of money to say it's a good thing to finance journalistic comics. We've been trying and doesn't seem to stick.
Thank you.
So if it's okay, I'd like to go next. I think I hear what you're saying, Heidi, and I think monetization has been really, really difficult for a lot of people. We're very lucky, when you get commissioned to make a comic book series, I think, and either the publisher or your client is paying your bills, it's wonderful, because you've obviously still worked within constraints and you're somewhat bound by them, and you don't have the ongoing IP sales and merchandising and all of that stuff. So hats off to Tony, for example, for driving his own franchise there. But for a lot of us that are still I guess commercial graphic novelists, or trying to basically build a business in that, it's tough. But Illya, I think what I'd love to see in the future, and we're working on some of it now, is I think we can monetize comic books by basically tapping an entirely new audience, one that's liquid, that didn't exist before, and like me, are huge tech and comic book nerds. And I'm talking about the crypto community. And we've been, I was very fortunate that I had a friend who asked me a long time ago to help him draw some cats, and those cats were called crypto kitties, and they're huge on Ethereum. So hats off to Roham and Dapper Labs. But at the time, it's really incredible where NFTs have come since, and now crypto comics is a thing. So if any of you ever want to look at that, come talk to me, because I think we can definitely monetize that a lot better. We can get people to invest in our art, in our writing, in this medium, And I think we can get people to take it a lot more seriously, because you just need a couple of examples where something goes and sells for $500,000 and suddenly people start to take notice. And they're like, oh God, that I should have that. And that FOMO, I think, is very important in order to create momentum behind buying in the market. So I think NFT comics, this is one big area to watch and sort of look at. Again, Michael's smiling probably because he knows I'm a huge tech nerd and I'm all about that. The other big opportunity that I see is that there's no marketplace that is joining storytellers and writers with artists. So I think that there needs to be a marketplace that can just do that matching and allow the magic to happen. There's a lot of kids in school, universities that are doing no internships, but have huge art skills. And then there are all these people sitting there waiting to tell their story, but they can't draw to save their life. So how can you bring those people together and make something beautiful happen? So that's another idea right off the bat. So these are things that I guess I'd love to see happen in the future. And finally, what I'd love to see is more interoperability in language. So for example, when I was so into bande dessinée, French comic books, I used to use Google Translate on my phone, aim it at that and watch it translate on the screen while I read. And that's a great trick if you want to read French comic books. But really, if it's digital, at the click of a finger, and I know The Economist did this from English to Chinese to English and back and forth again, we could do this for all comic books, right? So suddenly kids can read the same thing in Arabic. And you've got, you know, and that complaint that, oh, 1% of the world's content is written in Arabic goes away. So I think there's a lot that we can do. And think about all the Chinese stuff that you just can't read because it's not in English, right? We need to just get rid of all these nonsense barriers by using technology. So I think, in summary, Illya, I think that I'm most excited about what technology will do for comic books in the coming sort of 2 to 3 years and what it's already doing now. So like I said, anybody want to talk about that, come knock on my door.
So mitigating some of the barriers that creators, artists, writers might feel if they have a story, a nonfiction story, a journalistic story that they want to tell, finding ways to minimize those.
I don't know if you're familiar with Substack. I think all of us are, right? Where's the Substack for comics? Like, is that Patreon? You know, it's not OnlyFans. So, you know, but the point is that, you know, we got to get the public an outlet to have these microtransactions that can back us, right? So if you want to give 15 pence or 15 cents to me as a creator, I'll take it. That 15 pence multiplied by 20 million is a lot of money, and it can keep my studio alive. So I think that and it's coming, all of these microtransactions, blockchains enabling it, and there's a lot of technology that can help.
Tony, does Webtoons have an auto-translate option for different language users?
It does not. It doesn't have an auto translate option. I know that if you're a Webtoon original, they go out of their way to make sure that it's translated. But I mean, Webtoon has been a great platform for us. But prior to joining Webtoon, we were trying to build the audience on our own like website organically, and being on Webtoon, even as a Canvas series and not an original, has been really world changing. I think that for me as an outsider, right? So I say outsider in the sense that like I'm in comics, but I am not a comics journalist. So I don't in any way claim to have a comprehensive view of all the different things that they have to keep in mind. But I think that for me, something that I would like to see the space move towards is more focus on smaller creators. Because I think that, like I said, using the Uncommons as an example, the Uncommons, we just broke 2 million readers. We had a story on CNN, had a story on NBC. I can't get comic journalists to respond to my emails majority of the time. And I'm kind of over here like, a company that is one of the largest comic publishers in the United States putting out another comic isn't newsworthy in any way, shape, or form. It's normal. It's expected. It's what they do. No one writes a story and is like, water company releases water bottle. Like it's literally what they do. But when like a smaller creator is like, hey, I got this thing, they're like, I don't know. And it comes back to the monetization piece a little bit. Like, if you know people are interested in Black Panther and there's a new Black Panther series coming out, yeah, we're going to run a story on Black Panther because people are going to click it and I need that ad revenue, dog. Like, I get it. I understand it. But I wish that there were more opportunities to support smaller creators?
I'll be quick. For my part, as an educator, I'd like to see more graphic novel translations of primary documents. Like the 9/11 report was like groundbreaking when that was released, because it was this giant report about what happened on that day that it was available to the public and nobody read it. But that graphic novel came out and it had this great fold out which showed the track of each of the planes that was hijacked, where they were at the same time during the course of that day. And that got a great deal of traction. And I know the Mueller report has a couple of different adaptations out for it, but I'd like to see more of that. Like there's a great graphic novel about the Constitution that is a graphic novel adaptation of the Constitution. It's Heidi, help me. Jonathan, who did that book?
Oh, well, I know isn't it published by
He did the history of video games and the history of theater.
He did the history of video games. He did a Hamilton book, and it's terrible that I can't remember his name right now, but I'm going to try to remember it, and I'll put it in the intro or outro after we're done here. But I'd love to see more of that, those primary documents illustrated and put out there for teachers and students, because I think understanding things like that, these particularly government documents, it goes a long way. The Constitution is all the rage right now, and everybody's interpreting it their own way. But having a visualized representation of how that founding doc of our country actually works would be ideal. So more of that.
Great. Well, looks like we're about at 1 hour. I just wanted to thank everyone really for your time and your contributions. This is, of course, an ongoing conversation and developing and changing with the culture and the art form that we all love so much. So Michael, Heidi, Tony, Farid, and Ethan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Really joyful to be with you and hear what you had to say.
Thank you very much.
Hello again. I really hope you enjoyed that panel. Like I said, it was an honor to participate and be part of this with these amazing educators. Special thanks to Illya Kowalchuk for moderating that panel and for all the panelists taking time out of their busy schedules to participate in this. Please remember to like and subscribe, and share this video to all of your educator and comic loving friends. Even people who don't love comics, anybody who's interested in journalism, perhaps. LitX is just a group of teachers that are trying to help other teachers by providing free professional development programming just like this. So check out our other videos. We have a bunch more coming up over the course of this summer. So we hope you'll come back after you've subscribed and take a look at some of the other great panels that we have scheduled for the weeks to come. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a really great summer.